A boy sits calmly in a psychiatric hospital and says to you, "Do you know, in the eyes of four-dimensional beings, you are like a very long worm, stretching from birth all the way to death." His gaze is clear, he quotes from an English physics journal, and his logic is impeccable. You realize you have no way to refute him. A man named Gao Ming, carrying this sense of bewilderment, spent 4 whole years entering and exiting psychiatric hospitals, sitting down to chat with over 200 people locked behind iron doors. He is not a doctor, nor a researcher, just a restless, curious soul. He wanted to figure out one thing: are they the ones who are mad, or are we all trapped in a cage called normal? He poured those 4 years into the book, left his genius, right his madman. Today we are going to talk about this book that kept many readers awake for several nights. I'm Sunshine, welcome to today's episode of Delusion. This book has a very unique structure. It's not a cohesive long-form narrative, but rather a collection of independent interview records, 48 vignettes, each acting like a small window opening up to a world you never imagined could exist. Gao Ming, the author, is neither a psychiatrist nor a scholar. He's the project director for a video production company in Beijing. Driven by an obsession with unsolved mysteries, he met a psychiatrist during a casual dinner gathering. From there, he began boldly reaching out through various connections to step into a field rarely accessible to outsiders. Over 4 years of his spare time, he visited psychiatric hospitals and public security systems, interviewing more than 200 patients. His approach was simple, almost childlike. He didn't bring recording devices or notebooks. He'd just sit down and treat the other person like any ordinary individual, as though chatting with a friend at a cafe. This non-judgmental attitude encouraged many patients, who were usually silent, to open up. The part of the book that left the deepest impression on me features a teenage boy whose case is referred to as the four-dimensional worm. Calmly, he asked Gao Ming, "Have you ever wondered what we might look like to four-dimensional beings?" Then he began explaining, if time is the fourth dimension, then a four-dimensional being could view your entire life, from birth to death, laid out along the timeline like a very long worm. That worm stretches from your bed to your school, to your workplace, and finally to your grave. Your entire life is just the body of that worm. The boy could cite relevant scientific literature in English, and his logic seemed to have no obvious flaws. Was he a psychiatric patient, or had he perhaps grasped something too profound for us to dare contemplate? Another case involved a woman who squatted in the hospital courtyard every day, staring at stones. She explained that stones are alive. Their time scale simply operates differently from ours. To a stone, humans move too fast, are born too quickly, and die too quickly, like flashes of light that vanish before they can even be noticed. The first time you hear her say this, you might laugh. The second time, you might pause in thought. Then there was the patient who claimed that an ant colony is a complete organism and each ant is just a cell. Worker ants cannot survive alone, just as cells can't live outside a body. His final question lingered: have you ever considered that maybe humans are just cells in a much larger organism? The whole book is like this, pulling you into one thought experiment after another. It lets you follow these madmen into their world, sometimes absurd, sometimes terrifying, and at times, unexpectedly poetic. In the book, Gao Ming poses an unsettling question: if you were to describe today's smartphones, the internet, or genetic engineering to a physicist from a century ago, wouldn't they think you were insane? So, what gives us the right to label people who contemplate ideas like time dimensions, dispersed life forms, or stone consciousness as abnormal? In its first year alone, this book sold 2 million copies. Many readers said they couldn't sleep for several nights after reading it, their minds spinning with one question: am I normal? Alright, now I'd like to take you into what truly fascinates me about this book. On the surface, this book explores the world of psychiatric patients, but in essence, it confronts a question that philosophers and psychologists have debated for thousands of years: what is normal? You might think this is a silly question. Normal is just what it sounds like: most people's behavior patterns conforming to societal norms, enabling them to work and live as usual. Isn't that normal? But after reading this book, you'll find that this answer is riddled with holes. One patient in the book perceives that everyone carries a color. Gray stands for the ordinary, blue for good fortune, and red for nearing death. Every day, it's as if she sees a filter overlaying the world, invisible to others, which she uses to guide her in helping those around her. Do you think she's mad? But in another era or under a different cultural context, a person like her might have been considered a seer, venerated in temples as the spiritual leader of her tribe. Gao Ming presses on with a pivotal question. If you describe today's smartphones, the internet, and genetic engineering to a physicist from a century ago, wouldn't they think you were insane? So what gives us the right to label people who ponder four-dimensional space, stone consciousness, or ant colony life forms as abnormal? This isn't about whitewashing mental illness. Mental illnesses are real, bring tangible suffering, and require real help. Even Gao Ming himself states that his aim in writing this book wasn't to deny the existence of mental illnesses. What he sought to do was something subtler: to pause and question. Who drew the line defining what's normal? Where is that line drawn? And is it truly drawn in the right place? Psychologist Wu Zhihong once recommended this book, sharing a thought-provoking perspective. He said that every child is born with a raw, intuitive sense of the world, a perception unfiltered by social norms. As we grow, these perceptions are systematically corrected. Parents, teachers, and peers repeatedly tell us what is real and what is normal. The parts of us that don't align with societal approval gradually get buried deeper and deeper. In a way, what we call madmen are those who never completed this correction process. They retain that raw capacity for perception but lack the ability to translate it into a language others can understand. This made me wonder, how many years have we spent hiding our weird intuitions and feelings because no one around us understood them, because we were told, don't think too much? Where then do these hidden parts of ourselves go? This brings me to the second core idea of the book that deeply moved me: loneliness. One case in the book is called The Lonely Watcher. A man repeatedly dreams the same dream, where he's on a boat surrounded by withered corpses stretching endlessly to the horizon. He is the only living person on the boat. There is no land, no direction, and no end. In his dream, he doesn't feel fear, just an infinite loneliness. Every time he wakes from the dream, he feels even worse, because in the real world, he still can't find anyone who truly understands him. This story hits you in the chest, not because it's the scariest, but because it reveals a sobering truth. What makes someone abnormal may not be their thoughts, but rather that those thoughts have no outlet and no one to embrace them. What's the difference between a genius and a madman? Gao Ming tentatively offers an answer in the book. A genius can move between two worlds. They can translate their extraordinary perceptions into a language others can understand, building connections with humanity through their work. Those we call madmen often get trapped in their strange worlds and can't find their way out, or even if they do, no one is willing to receive their signals. Loneliness is the starting point of madness, and its ultimate form. In later interviews, Gao Ming said that his biggest takeaway from those 4 years of interviews was this: failed communication isn't typically due to the other person, but because we approach them with preconceived notions. When he truly set aside those assumptions, he realized that the so-called abnormal people were, in their own ways, making a deeply sincere effort to explain their worlds to him. This made me think, how often do we, in daily life, listen to others with preconceived filters? How often do we stop listening the moment we find someone a bit odd, dismissing everything they say as not worth taking seriously? How much truly interesting, perhaps even genuine, insight have we missed because of this? The third theme I want to touch on is the nature of reality itself. There's a philosophy student in the book who asked Gao Ming a question that left him silent for a long time. If my reality is entirely coherent to me, logically tight and perceptually clear, what makes your reality any truer than mine? This question isn't mere sophistry. In physics, there are similar discussions, such as the observer effect in quantum mechanics or the many worlds interpretation, which suggests something deeply unsettling. The objective reality we speak of might just be a construct influenced by observers. We think we're observing an independent world, but in truth, our act of observation continuously shapes the world. Of course, this doesn't mean we should abandon our sense of reality or equate the perceptions of psychiatric patients with scientific truths. Gao Ming doesn't draw such a conclusion in the book either. He only offers a perspective. What we call normality is merely a consensus adopted by most people. This consensus is highly useful, it keeps society functioning, but it isn't equivalent to the ultimate truth. Those who hover at the edges of that consensus might be sick in some cases, but in others, their sensory systems might just be brushing against corners the consensus hasn't yet reached. One patient was asked, "Are you afraid of death?" He answered, "Life and death are just names we've given to things. Life itself isn't inherently good, and death isn't inherently bad. I'm not afraid of the name." I don't know if he had truly transcended the fear of death, but his words have stayed with me. Perhaps we attach too many names to things and then become afraid of those names, forgetting that they're just tools, and we barely understand what lies behind them. After finishing this book, a few sentences keep resurfacing in my mind. The first is from one of the patients: "Time isn't passing by, we are." 10 words that make you pause and reflect every time you read them. We often say time flies, but really, it's us consuming it at lightning speed. Time doesn't move, we do. This viewpoint is at once disheartening and strangely comforting. The second comes from the woman who studied stones. To truly see the world, you must use the sky's eyes to see the sky, the cloud's eyes to see the clouds, the wind's eyes to see the wind, and the stone's eyes to see the stones. To me, this doesn't sound crazy, it sounds profoundly clear-headed. We're always looking at everything with human eyes, assuming we're seeing it all. The third is from Gao Ming himself, near the end of the book. "For unexplained phenomena that existing science can't yet account for, respect all interpretations, because among them might lie the real answer." This serves as a reminder: when we encounter something we don't understand, let's not rush to conclusions. Let's remain humble. Alright, let's wrap up. With The Left Side of Genius, The Right Side of Madness, Gao Ming spent 4 years having in-depth conversations with over 200 psychiatric patients. He turned those conversations into windows that open up to other worlds. In that world, there are 4-dimensional worms, sentient ant colonies, stones that don't comprehend human language, and solitary voyagers crossing an infinite sea of loneliness. What struck me most about this book wasn't the stories themselves, but the realization that came after finishing it: maybe we ourselves aren't entirely normal either. We've all entertained strange thoughts, felt inexplicable emotions, or considered those late-night questions we barely dare to voice. We simply hide them because there's no place for them in our surroundings. The difference between a genius and a madman may not lie in intelligence or logic, but in connection. If someone's thoughts can find someone to resonate with, if they can be translated into something others understand, it's called creativity. But if they can't find that connection, only loneliness remains. I often wonder how many people are quietly watching a distant horizon that only they can see, with no one to ferry them across, and no one even knowing there is an uncharted sea out there. To close today's episode, I'll leave you with Gao Ming's favorite quote from the book: "In any era, for words matter most, restraint and humility." Restraint against labeling others, and humility in admitting that our understanding of this world is far too limited. If today's episode reminds you of something, please feel free to share it with me in the comments. I'll read every single one of them attentively. That's all for today's episode. Wherever and whenever you're listening, I wish you good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. This is Delusion. See you next time.